So my name is Simona Tassarini, and I work at Massive. I'm a video games developer, and this talk is just about how I got into the industry, what my life expectations were, and what actually happened, and and then I'm going to talk a little bit about Massive and what we do and what I do every day, and our engine, which is called Snowdrop. So let's see if this works. Okay, so as I said, there's going to be an introduction, and then I'm going to talk about Massive, video games, Snowdrop, what makes an engine good, the challenges that we face when we develop an engine for a video game, and then I'm going to have a little bit of time, hopefully, for questions, and let's start. So, my name is Simona Tassarini, and I'm a Snowdrop programming lead at Massive. This means I have a little team and I lead what they do. I'm Italian. This beautiful church is part of the village I come from. I come from the countryside, and this is a Roman church, and it's very, very old, and it tries to fall down almost every year, and there's nothing around for miles. If you don't have a driving license, you can go anywhere, and that's where I come from. Being from the countryside, there wasn't a lot of opportunities for fun when I was growing up, and school was a big, a big one. When I was about 12, we were writing a book for our parents, and as you can see from the picture, I'm a bit old, and this is what the school had. We had Intel 286, and I started working with this machine and typing things, and I thought it was the best thing ever. I got really, really excited about working with computers, and I wasn't really sure what you did with them, but I thought there were a lot of possibilities. And so from that point on, I decided, okay, in my life, I want to work with computers. And this was a very strange thing to say. I didn't have a computer at home. None of my friends had one. I think one of my friends had a Commodore, and that was the extent of it. So I continued studying, and I went to a high school that prepared us for becoming financial software programmers. So we studied accounting and programming, and that was really strange. And then I thought, actually, I want to be a good programmer. I don't want to be just making the same type of programs all the time. And I went on and I studied at the University of Bologna. This is the oldest university in the world. It's really, really, really old. And it's just near to my house, so that was kind of helpful. I did a master's degree, and I graduated in 2003. While I was studying, I realized that the things I actually loved were the software engineering part, but also 3D graphics, rendering, and animation. And I studied a lot in these areas, and that proved to be very useful later on. I wasn't really studying for a specific goal, a specific type of job. I was just doing the things I enjoyed. Because I realized that my opportunities in Italy would be quite small, especially in my little kind of countryside area, I decided it would be a really exciting thing to do a research thesis abroad. And I was really lucky, and I got into a research lab at UC Davis in California. And I was there for about six months. And this was at a time when it wasn't that easy to fly, and I didn't even have a proper student visa, so it was pretty scary sometimes. I had to leave the country twice to just be able to be there for the amount of time. I did my research thesis in fast rendering, and so this was at the time we had lots of volumetric data. Where, for example, if you want to represent fluid dynamics, or I don't know, how the density of the sun is, you would have a 3D set of data, and it was hard to visualize it in real time. If you wanted to just dive with the camera into the sun to see what the specific areas of density were, you couldn't do it in real time. So we were working towards finding a technique to do this. And that's what my thesis was about. There were already several types of research for this, but I did an actual implementation, and that was really exciting. After doing this, I simply graduated and I looked for jobs. And there wasn't a lot that was particularly exciting in my area. So I ended up just working for a company called Bookmark, or BKM, as they've been rebranded recently. This company just made web servers in C# and ASP.NET. And that was also something I enjoyed. And as a first job, it was really good. It was a small startup. We had about 6 or 7 employees, and magically, half of the programmers were women. I never, ever again found myself in this type of situation. This was countryside Italy, and half of the programmers in this company were women. It was so strange. The expectations that it set up for me were very, very different from reality. And this job was really good, and I enjoyed it very much, and I stayed there for a year. But then, Holland called. So someone from Holland started calling my house, and they were talking on the phone in English, and my grandma was answering the phone. And and this was not particularly conducive to actually going for an interview, but eventually they got me on the phone, and we started talking, and I went to Amsterdam for an interview. And what they did was, they were a company that did lots of motion capture. So this is the thing where you have an enormous room with many cameras around it. And you put a subject in the middle with normally a marker suit. So it's like a black suit with white ball markers. And you record what they're doing from all these cameras. And then you can build a 3D representation of their movement. The main business of the company was this. But they also had a side project. The side project was the most expensive and insanely complicated serious game I've ever seen. I didn't realize this at the time because I wasn't really into gaming or anything like that. But basically there was this setup with all the cameras. You can see all the cameras here at the top. And then there was a Vicon platform at the bottom. And this was a hydraulic platform who could move with enough sensitivity to actually balance a stick. So it was so delicate and sensitive that you could put a stick and it would be able to balance it automatically. And then you would put a person on it, and you would put them in a mocap suit. And then you would put them in a 3D environment. So you could have a 3D environment, and then they would be in it, and you could train them to do some things. This was particularly useful for things like rehabilitation. So if someone had an injury and they were walking a bit wonky, they could see a representation of the skeleton on the screen. It was all incredibly complicated and really, really interesting. We also had a really, really old, well, this was 2004, so a really, really old set for VR. So VR goggles that had really low frequency, and you could put people in them, but they could only wear them for 10-15 minutes, and then they would start getting sick. So that wasn't good for people who were getting rehabilitation, etc. And we worked on this system. This was extremely expensive. Just the mocap system is like hundreds of thousands of dollars. But hospitals bought it, and at some point in the military, to help with the rehabilitation of, but also to help construct an exoskeleton to make a super soldier. And at this point, I kind of got a bit, okay, this is starting to be a bit weird for me. And so I started looking around for other positions. And I was thinking about where I wanted to live. This was in Amsterdam. And I didn't really speak the language. I'd been only there a year. And I thought, okay, let's try the UK. I started looking around. What could I do? What do I have experience of? Hang on a minute, I've been working on a video game until like now. And so I sent a lot of applications, and the only one that responded to it was Rare. If you've ever heard of Rare, this is a historical over 25-year-old in the business, video game company in the UK. They've made some of the most cherished Nintendo games, and they were bought in 2003 by Microsoft. And since then, the direction of the company changed quite a lot. I arrived shortly after, and we started working on kind of family casual games. More specifically, we worked on the Knack Sports series, and I started as an engine and tool programmer, and then slowly I worked up my way, and by the end of 2012, we had finished Knack Sports 2, and I was the tools lead for that project. And we kept winning BAFTAs as well, which is the kind of Oscar of video games in the UK. So that was a good time. And then we were in the meantime, so I've been at Rare for like 8 years. I'm enjoying it, but I'm starting to get a bit bored of working on the same Connect Sports game, effectively. And I fell in love, I got married, and to a video game programmer, of course, and because that's what it has to be. And so we started talking about what we want to do in the future, and we started looking for other positions and opportunities. And we came to Massive in Sweden. So this is me, this is the MD, and these are some colleagues. We're just totally not just putting this up for the photo. So we arrived in 2012, and I was a senior programmer from the start, because of course I had quite a lot of experience. And then about 15 minutes into moving to Sweden, I was pregnant. And, and yeah, he's lovely. And so I was on parental leave. I didn't even complete the first year at Massive. I had to go on parental leave before that. And then I was on parental leave for 15 months, which to an Italian is insane. To someone who's used to the British culture is also insane. But I really loved it. I thought it was brilliant. I was a little bit worried I would go back to work and they would just say, hey, this doesn't really show that you're particularly interested in your work here. But actually, no, I came back and they were like, hey, do you want to be a Snowdrop architect? We're like, sure. Snowdrop is our in-house engine. And so I started working on that and trying to make the engine a bit more sane and a bit more shareable between different games. And then eventually I became Snowdrop programming lead with a little team. And that's where I am now. And this was a really long first slide. The others are much faster. So what's Massive? So this is the building that we have in the center. Let's do a little bit of very incomplete history. It was founded in '97. And then in 2000, it released Ground Control, which is very successful and really great reviews. And then in 2007, released World in Conflict, another very successful game. And then in 2008, it was acquired by Ubisoft. If you don't know what Ubisoft is, it's a conglomerate of many video game studios. I actually haven't checked how many there are. I just know there are many all over the world. It's crazy. There must be at least 40 or 50. It's a regionally French company, and it started in France, so there is at least 4 or 5 studios in France. And the language that is spoken internally at Ubisoft is English and then French, so I have had no real reason to learn Swedish until now, and that's terrible of me. And then in 2010, Massive helped releasing Assassin's Creed Revelation. We just did a small part of this. And then in 2012, we helped making Far Cry 3. In the meantime, while a lot of these things were happening, we were actually, so, and then 2014 released Just Dance Now. I don't know if you know what Just Dance is. It's the dance game that you play with some kind of special controller, and Massive implemented the version lets you use your mobile. And that was a very exciting thing to do for this company who's used to making like war games, basically. And then in 2016, we finally released Tom Clancy's The Division. This was March 8th this year. and it took a lot of work to get it out the door. This was an insanely ambitious title, especially for the size of the team that we had here. And we had lots of help from other studios as well. Tons of people worked on it. And luckily, it sold more copies in its first 24 hours than any game in Ubisoft history. So it was all worth it. It had the biggest week ever for a new franchise. Because Tom Clancy obviously is a series of games and, well, books and characters and whatnot. But this was a new franchise into this environment. And then since then, it's had its ups and downs. The reviews went down and then they went up again. I think we fixed a lot of problems and we're in a good position again now. So I'm very proud of what we achieved there. Some more info. So this is massive. It's almost 400 people right now. This was us days after the release. I am here. And it's really funny. If you live or work near us, you will sometimes see the whole of these people just walking down the road somewhere, like, I don't know, to the cinema so that we can have a meeting because there's no space to contain us all. Or it's a lot of people. And we have very strong ties to the other Ubisoft studios, as I said. The division was developed in with the help of another 3 video game studios. No, 4. One in the US, one in the UK, in Newcastle, and one in France, and also one in Romania. So we have a great work culture is diverse and vibrant. The video game industry is not famous for having good work-life balance, but we try really hard to achieve that. And we have different people from lots of different places. It's a very international place to work. And we have plans to expand further. So the building we are currently in is too small for 400 people. And we have bought a new building in Malmö, and we're going to try to move to that in the next couple of years. Because we expect that we will expand enough to fill it, and we can't really say any numbers, but it will be a lot more than 400. And what do we do in-house? So obviously we make games. We have the Snowdrop Engine, which is completely made in-house by people at Massive. We also have the test lab. So this is a user research lab where we basically get people and let them try a game to see what they think about it and try to improve it. And we also have the Uplay development. You might have heard of this. So Uplay is a way to buy and hold your game content effectively. So you can buy a Ubisoft game and you can buy other brands of games on Uplay. It's a bit like Steam or Origin. It used to be fairly clunky, and then in the last couple of years, Massive took it under its wing and started developing it in-house, and since then it's got a lot better. Massive is part of Ubisoft, and we use lots of other services from the other studios and the company. But we also pride ourselves in being a one-stop shop. We can basically make a game internally. We don't need to talk to anybody else. We have all the experience and all the, all the people you need to do a game. We have a brand team, we have the engine. It's very encapsulated. So, why should you work in video games? Well, it's a really creative environment. If you are a programmer like I am, there aren't really that many exciting things you can do. You can work for banks for banking software. You can work for lots of things, of course, and most are nice. But this is, to me, is the most creative environment I can find. There is no other place where I would be rubbing shoulders with artists all day long, musicians, and I don't know. There is such a variety of abilities in the team. It's just crazy to me. There are 3D artists, programmers, composers, so many various disciplines. It gives us a platform to innovate in many places. You can't really break new ground. Like, you have to kind of keep the legacy going and worry about the costs. Well, in video games, you have to innovate. You have to be top of the line. You have to always be the first and the best. And the technology is just incredible. The first time I came to Massive for an interview and they showed me Snowdrop, I was gobsmacked. And this is coming from a Microsoft studio that had its own engine as well. So it's just something else. The things that we develop in Massive are so deep and so useful. It's, to me, is the best in the industry right now. And if you are interested in the video games industry, you should keep in mind that it's a fast-growing entertainment industry. So it's still not as big as Hollywood or video or films or TV series, etc. But it's definitely getting there. It's becoming mainstream. So if you're familiar with the video games culture, you know that there are some problems with the video game industry. I'm not going to say they don't exist. It can be a sexist place. It can be a not very friendly place. But I honestly believe that the best way to make things better from inside is not enough to just be on the sidelines and say, "Ooh, that's bad." We can be role models. We can be spokespersons inside the video game industry and make things better for everybody. So this is Snowdrop, which is the engine that we develop in Massive. It's a collection of modules, so you have ideally mix and match of things you can put together to make your game. And it has an integrated editor inside the game, so you can run the game and the editor into the same piece of software. And it's a set of tools and workflows. So a tool, obviously, is a thing you run to achieve a purpose. So like you run, I don't know, Gmail to send emails. A workflow is a little bit more complicated. It's the way you achieve a goal that needs multiple steps. So for example, let's say you want to make your game and then you want the text to be displayed in different languages depending on which language the person wants to play it in. So this sounds like a simple thing to do, but it needs to be set up in a workflow. For example, you set up each of these specific strings as a special type, and then the game knows that it needs to go and find the other languages when requested. And you have to decide where you want to store this information, if you want to keep it in another specific tool, and how things move around between these tools. And Snowdrop provides ways to achieve this type of goal with multiple things in a pipeline. So what are the tenets of Snowdrop? Well, we want the content developers to have power. And this is not obvious. We actually want the content developers to be able to surprise us with the things they can do. Oh, wrong. We want to minimize dependencies. We try to make things as encapsulated as possible so that you can use one module and not another because you're not interested, for example, and you can maybe write your own. And we want to have fast development cycle. The amount of time that it takes from having an idea, implementing it, and trying it in game needs to be as fast as possible. If it isn't, you start cutting corners and not trying things out, and so it's really important that it needs to be really, really, really quick. So I'm gonna try to show you a video now, and the sound might not carry much to the back, but we'll try.
We wanted to create an engine that was capable of creating truly next generation of AAA games. But we also saw that as games were getting bigger, so were the projects working on them. And we wanted to go better, not bigger. And we all wanted to be smart and not rely on brute force. the engine should also support how we work in the studio, which is a lot of quick iterations of features, have a lot of creativity and the freedom to experiment and
the core of the Snowdrop engine is a node-based scripting system. This is really the beating heart of the engine that allows us to do what we do. It affects all systems of the engine, from rendering to AI to mission scripting and the UI. It allows us to quickly develop our assets and to preview them and interact with them in ways that have never been done before in the industry.
It's so easy to use and to set up that you really have the freedom and the time to explore different options.
The editor is basically just a set of different windows that you can move around whatever you want. And if you work in a specific way, you can adjust the editor to fit your needs.
Working with the engine is kind of like solving a puzzle, because the components are usually already there. It's just a matter of how you combine them together.
You can do whatever you want. It's like Lego, because it's just different building blocks, and you can test, does this fit here, more or less. You can make some really cool results just by very simple components. I really enjoy to work with it.
At Massive, we call our work style a form of hectic fun. We're very busy all the time, and we like to use our talents to really try to make the best product that we can.
All right, the store was empty. I heard that gunfire.
There's always that chance of somebody's eyes glazing over and they're realizing, but what if we do this? And that person runs out and comes back with this fantastic idea that somebody hasn't tried before. We're really creating something new and unique together.
with this power and with the usability in the tools, we saw that people really excelled in what they created. We got amazing graphics, we got new features, and we got unique innovations that we didn't expect, but that really pushed the engine forward. And all this was thanks to the foundation that the engine and the tools supplied.
Between the philosophy of our company and the power of our technology, what we've achieved is to empower our artists to really achieve levels of quality never before seen.
So this video is a little bit old, so it looks even better now. So this is just, I thought I'd take a screenshot of something so I can show you how it works. This is what Chris was talking about, which is the scripting core of the engine. So things can be scripted by connecting nodes. So for example, you can have a node that says, hey, take my number and multiply it by 20 and pass it on to something else. But you can also make loops, you can make conditional statements. It's a bit like programming, but it can be done by people who are not programmers, of course. I'm not saying that it doesn't require training, it's hard, but it's very, very powerful. And this is a typical view of how you work in our UI system. So you have your graph running here, and then you get a preview in the editor, effectively, so you can see things clearly. And anything you change in here changes in real time here as well. And if you have a 3D environment where you can actually visualize what it's going to look like in-game, you can also preview it in-game directly. And this shows you exactly how it will look like. Everything in here is completely customizable. We have, let's say you want to see all of the current assets that are already available that you might be able to reuse in here. There is another little control that you can just show and put somewhere and then use. And then once you've found the way you really want to work, you can save this and you can use it forever. You can also say, hey, you know, I work like this, do you want to try this? And hand it over to someone else so that they can see if that's the best way to work. But it's very, very flexible, and the idea is that is the content developer completely driving this. Programmers don't really put their hands into this type of stuff. They just provide functionality, and then the content developers use them how they like. So let's have a quick look at what we think makes an engine good. Well, it really depends what you're trying to do. So there isn't really a straight answer. We think a good engine is modular, so that you can take one thing and not another thing if you want, so that you can rewrite stuff and you can pick and choose. We think it's good if it's powerful for content developers, so that they can achieve things on their own without having to talk to a third person or a fourth person to achieve something. Obviously, what I said before, the fast development cycle, being able to have an idea, try it out, implement it in game, and visualize it immediately. And then you want to have debugging and performance tools so that you can find out where the problems are, because the more systems are complicated and powerful, the easier it is to introduce a problem. And for the performance tools is something that's important, especially when you have a game the size of The Division, which has just one enormous map, which is the size of Manhattan, effectively. Obviously, samples and documentation. If you can say, hey, you use this feature this way, and document it, and also keep the documentation up to date, which is the biggest challenge, really, is very useful. And for this type of game, you need to have a strong content management so that you can know that something exists, you can find it, you can reuse it, and if the DLC. So anything that you do post-release needs to be also done solidly, so that after you release and you start adding things to the game, it's not going to break everything. And then there is the kind of, because everything is always continuously moving, and you have a team of 400 people using the latest, you sometimes want to be able to say, this version has been validated, we know it works, please use this one. And that's obviously good. These are really uncontroversial, like everybody can agree that these are good things. So let's look at the controversial ones. How much power is too much? We give our content developers so much power that they can break things. Is that good? Is that bad? How do you feel about that? How much trust do you have in your developers? Do you think you can just tell them what works and what doesn't, and they will do it? Do you train everybody in every new feature? How do you handle this? Do you want to enforce a workflow and say, if you want to achieve X, you have to do A, B, and C, and this is the only way? Or maybe do you want to set up a set of best practices and say, maybe if you want to achieve this, you should use A and B. Or do you just want to forbid making errors? You can just make it super tight and say, no, you're not allowed to do this. Do you want to deploy the latest build to everybody? That is good for many reasons. Every time you sync and you use the latest build, you're actually testing what's just been done. You're always on the cutting edge of what exists. You have the latest feature, the latest data, but it could be broken. So how do you manage this? You could also say, hey, you always sync to the build that we make in the morning, and we know it's good, so you have that one. There are so many things that need to be completely defined by you, and it's a continuous struggle. You have to answer these questions almost every day. You come to work and you have an example of something that went wrong, and you have to decide if you want to actually do something to stop it from going wrong again, or if it's okay, it's a cost that we're going to take. So what are the challenges for us going forward? We want to be consistent. Whenever we think about a new feature, we want to say, hey, making this thing, does it make sense in the context of how Snowdrop works? Is it a reasonable thing to add? Okay. Is it useful? Sometimes somebody has a great idea and it sounds really cool, but actually we're never going to use it, or it's something that maybe one person will use and nobody else will. What's the cost of this? You need to make that type of decision. Is it maintainable? This means a lot of things, from once you've written the code, who's going to be able to keep it up to date and update it and improve it and fix it? But also, maybe this code relies on a third-party lib. Let's say we're using Havoc, which is a physics third party. And how do you want to do this connection? Do you want to just use it straight? And then if we decide to move from Havoc to something else, you're going to have to rewrite a lot of code. Do you want to put an interface in the middle so that it's a bit more separated? How are you going to maintain it? And then you have to stop and think about what the current issues are. Analyze the weak points of the engine and take a step back, because once you work with something every day, it's hard to kind of say, yes, this is not the best. Take a step back, analyze, and then you can compare to other good engines. There are many off-the-shelf engines that we can compare to, and also many good engines inside of Ubisoft. All of this process can take a long time. You don't want to skip all of it, but you also have to be very careful that you don't slow everything down so much that nothing gets done and there is no improvement ever. So what do you have to deal with every day? Technical debt. So the game development is in full swing, and especially at the end of a project when everything needs to be done the day, yesterday. Things tend to be done as quickly as possible and sometimes not in an ideal way. This is something that we have to just acknowledge and move on from. This is called technical debt, and then you can make a decision. You can say, actually, it's okay that it's a little bit crap, and we can continue making games with it. Or you have to take a step back and say, this area needs re-engineering, and the game is finished now, and we can do it. So you want to clean the engine, but you have to do it within reason. You can't just go full, let's make it beautiful, and then it's going to take you 10 years, and then it's obsolete. There are lots of other engines at Ubisoft, and because we are part of the ecosystem, we can just ask them to have a look, and we just get the full code and try everything. So it's really good for inspiration, but it's also really good to just steal stuff. We can just rip off the whole system and put it in ours. And while you do all of this, continue keeping in mind that the needs of the game are king. You want to develop a good engine, it's really important to have a good engine, but the game is what matters. So if your plan is too long or is not benefiting directly the game, then probably you have to change it. So this is another little video.
The Snowdrop Engine was specially developed to create the deep and vast universe of Tom Clancy's The Division. Never before has a video game reached this level of detail. The rendering engine supports volumetric lighting to add atmosphere throughout the environment. Production. Snowdrop uses a vast range of environmental factors, including light. By harnessing next-gen technology, Snowdrop's shader system allows the world to react to the constantly changing weather. We live in a fragile world. The Snowdrop Engine makes this world a reality. Be prepared to enter the next generation of gaming.
So that was my description about what I do today and how I got here. And I wanted to thank you for listening to me rambling about my life.